In this video, I'm going to show you how to factor, and with factoring we have a equals 1 in these cases. So to factor these, I like to start with creating a t-chart, and I'm going to put my middle term and its sign here, and I'm going to put my last term with its sign right here. Now my goal is to find two numbers that multiply to get me negative 15, but add to get me 2. So even though there's a negative in front of the 15, I'm going to start by coming up with two numbers that multiply to get me 15. So I'm going to start with 1 and 15. I also have 3 and 5. Now I can consider which of these has the potential to combine in any form to get me 2. There's no way that 15 and 1 could get me a 2, but now 3 and 5 will be able to get me a 2, and one of those will have to be negative. So then I ask myself, is it going to be negative 3 and 5, or is it going to be 3 and negative 5? The only way to get a positive 2 is if I have a negative 3 here. 5 and negative 3, or 5 minus 3, is 2. And I can double check and say, is negative 3 times 5 negative 15? And it is. So now my answer can be represented as x minus 3 and x plus 5. And again, these numbers here are coming straight from my work over on the side in the t-chart, and that will be your final answer. Now, if you're asked to find the zeros, because technically we're looking at a parabola, and if you're asked to find the zeros, all you're going to do is set each of these equal to 0. And we're setting them equal to 0 because we're talking about zeros, which are the intercept on the x-axis, so our x-intercept. And that should be easy enough. We would add 3 to both sides here to move it over, and I would get that x equals 3. And I would subtract 5 from both sides here, and I would get x equals negative 5. And that is where you would find those intercepts. Now for the next problem here, we've got something else going on in that I have a 3. Oops, my screen is shifted. I have a 3, I have a negative 15, and I have a 18. Now what I notice first is that those numbers are divisible by 3. So I'm going to factor out or divide out a 3 from each of those terms. And when I do that, I'm going to be left with an x squared. I'm going to be left with minus 5x. And I'll be left with plus 6. And now I can go ahead and work with this the same way that I just did in the above problem. Now the 3 is just going to drop in front of my answer, where we said we will have our 2 sets of parentheses. So I'm going to start with my t-chart again. And again, looking at this problem here, we're going to pull out our middle term, the negative 5, and my last term. And looking for what they can multiply to get me 6, but combine to get me negative 5. I'm going to start with my 6's. I have 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Now, in both cases, they have a way of combining to get me negative 5. So now I have to play around with those numbers. In order for 6 and 1 to work, I would have to have negative 6 and positive 1 to combine and get me this. But if I check my multiplication, a negative 6 times 1 would get me a negative 6 up top. So that does not work. 2 and 3, they would both have to be negative in order for it to get me a negative 5 when I combine them. And when I multiply, it still gets me a positive. So this works for both. So I'm going to go ahead and drop those right into my answer. I have an x minus 2 and an x minus 3. And that would be your final factored problem.